Top five, top five, top five.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Countdown, the #1 sports ranking show on YouTube. There's been a lot of talk about the Kansas City Chiefs becoming a dynasty, a lot of dynasty talk going on. So Brandon and I thought, what better topic could we do than the 5 greatest sports dynasties of all time?
Yeah, dynasties completely changed the landscape of the sport. Once you see a team completely take over, start breaking records, it really lasts a whole lifetime, really, for the sport of the game or for the sake of the game. So yeah, top 5 dynasties of all time. Before we break that down, though, make sure you smash that like button, hit that subscribe, because we're coming back every single week with some fire-ass content.
Absolutely, and something to keep in mind is this isn't just about, who won the most titles in the shortest amount of span or, who was the most dominant compared to the league. There's a lot of factors that Brandon and I consider when it came to this top 5 ranking as to who was the competition, the longevity of the dynasty, their peak, how good they were. Obviously, championships played a part, and just the overall success of that team during that era.
Yeah, a lot of factors go into it, and you're going to see exactly why we came up with this list 5 through 1 for those reasons.
Right, so getting into number 5 of the greatest dynasties of all time, we're starting with actually the team that probably had the most championships of any team in their span, and we're going with the Boston Celtics back in the 60s with Bill Russell leading the way, a lot of other Hall of Fame players as part of that team, and this team just completely dominated the NBA during that time. But one thing we have to keep in mind is what was the NBA at that time, all right? There was only 8 teams in the league. There was only a conference finals and then an NBA finals, so it wasn't the same kind of playoffs. It wasn't the same kind of regular season battles that the teams are going through nowadays. So as impressive as it is to win 9 championships in 11 years, I think it was, like 8 straight, something like that, some crazy shit. As great as that is, when you're doing it against lackluster competition or dudes that were playing the NBA part-time and then being a janitor the other part of their life or doing all these other things, just you have to look at the overall context of the league, and that's why the Celtics were only at number 5 despite all that championship success.
Yeah, like you said, there was only 8 teams in the NBA at that time. Even though this team had plenty of Hall of Famers, we're talking about John Havlicek, Bob Cousy, like you said, the most important, Bill Russell. They had some generational players, some Hall of Famers, but at the end of the day, when there's only 8 teams and you basically automatically make it to the finals, where you're one of the best teams on each side, then, the level of competition and the whole grind of being in the playoffs is not really a part of winning that championship. So that's the reason why they came in at number 5, despite winning all of those rings.
Right, so moving into number 4, now we're coming back closer to the 21st century, closer to where we are now with the Golden State Warriors, Brandon.
Yeah, a lot of people will be surprised that the Warriors are coming in at number 4, especially based off recency bias. But this team won 4 championships in 8 years. They were basically in the ship almost every single year playing the Cavs. I think they came in 6 out of the 8 years they were in the finals or something like that.
Right.
And I mean, this team has some of the greatest shooters of all time, some of the greatest teams of all time. We're talking about a 72-win team, 71-win team, whatever it was. But at the end of the
73,
day,
actually.
73, yeah. One of the greatest teams of all time, 73 wins. I mean, they had KD, they had Steph Curry, they had Klay Thompson, they had Draymond Green, the Swiss Army knife. So they really had some studs on their team. But at the end of the day, there are some franchises or there are some dynasties that did have a little bit more longevity, that did win some more ships, despite all that the Warriors have done for the game of basketball. They still came in at number 4 on this list.
Right, and thing is, the Warriors aren't done yet. Like, Steph Curry is only 34, 35 years old. He still has some juice in him. He's still playing at an MVP level. So we're making this video in 2023, so it's very possible that the Warriors could move up this list when it's all said and done. When you look at their overall body of work right now, we're talking about a 73-win team. We're talking about the greatest regular season team ever that was pretty much a play or two away from winning the championship and being undoubtedly the greatest season ever in the history of basketball. Then you combine the fact that they then got Kevin Durant, probably the most talented, unstoppable team we've ever seen in the association. At least if you're comparing teams versus the competition, it's hard to say any team could compare to that 2017, 2018, really even 2019 Warriors. The only reason they didn't win was because 2 of their best 3 players got injured. But that team, compared to everyone else, it just wasn't even a competition. Like, you're going into the season, everyone knows the Warriors are going to be in the finals. Everyone knows no one's really going to challenge them. And so when you have a team that talented with that much success, they have to be one of the greatest dynasties of all time, and that's why they're number 4 on this list.
Couldn't have said it better, Rob.
So getting into number 3, though, we got a threefer. The first threefer in the history of the countdown. We like to do a lot of different sports rankings. This is our first sports dynasty rankings. And when you're talking about a team like the New York Yankees, who have 27 championships. Obviously, there's a lot of runs of success. We're including all 3 of those in here with the 1930s Yankees, the 1950s Yankees, and the 1990s Yankees, all being led by Hall of Fame, superstar caliber players, and all having a lot of success with obviously a shit ton of championships to show for it.
Yeah, and you're probably wondering how a team that had a 3-fer ended up number 3 on this list.
Right.
And at the end of the day, winning decades after decades after decades shows a different level of versatility from an organization, a different level of buy-in, culture, the whole 9 yards. But at the end of the day, some of those early decades that they ended up winning all those championships, there weren't many teams in the MLB,
right.
Rob. So, I mean, when your level of competition, kind of just like the Celtics, when you don't have to go through the grind of destroying multiple teams in the playoffs to get to that championship, it really impacts, you know, not the significance, but the level and the path that you had to go down.
100%.
And at the end of the day, the 90s Yankees still won plenty of games in the new playoff format and all that. So, I mean, this is still one of the greatest franchises of all time, one of the greatest dynasties of all time, and that's why you saw them do it in so many different phases of, you know, the baseball era.
Yeah, absolutely. If we're ranking the greatest franchises of all time, might not be a bad topic we could do, so stay tuned for that one. But this is just the greatest dynasty. So if we're talking overall franchise, sure, Yankees are probably number 1 at that list. I don't know who would even be close, but when we're talking about just strictly dynasties, their best dynasties came in those 30s and 50s, like you were talking about, when there was lackluster competition. All you have to do is just win the regular season, and you're in the World Series. There's no playoffs to go through, so it's a lot different landscape than what we see today, and so that's why they weren't necessarily top 1 or 2, but clearly had to make this list and in the top 3.
Exactly.
So getting into number 2, though, the only NFL dynasty to make this list, of course, we're talking about the New England Patriots, Brandon.
New England Patriots were fucking terror for as long as almost I can remember, winning 3 championships in 4 years,
right.
then winning 3 championships in 5 years. And you think some of the Super Bowls they lost, ended up losing to the Giants twice, can't beat the NFC East teams in the Super Bowl, lost to the Eagles as well. So, I mean, some of the Super Bowls that they lost, they were heavy favorites in those games. So just to see the Patriots do it in the early mid-2000s and then come back and do it again in the 2010s
right.
with one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, one of the greatest coaches of all time. And honestly, those Patriots teams might have never been the most talented teams. You think about some of those receiving cores, I mean, Gronk's a Hall of Famer, but the second other best receiver was Julian Edelman. And then besides that, you had Danny Amendola, guys like that.
Deion Branch.
Deion Branch.
Right.
Wes Welker never wanted up winning a ring. So, I mean, Tom Brady wasn't throwing to the greatest receivers the years that they were winning the Super Bowl.
Right.
I mean, Randy Moss and him were obviously one of the greatest of all time, but no Super Bowl that year. Exactly. So, I mean, the way that Belichick and Tom Brady and the Patriots culture and the organization did it just shows a true level of tenacity and buy-in from a stellar-ass team. I mean, that really just lacked the talent, but had the camaraderie and the teamwork to get it done.
Yeah, and I think you're kind of talking about it already, but like how they won those Super Bowls, I think is very important to the story as well. Like in the early 2000s, it was straight defense. Like some people don't want to talk about it, but Tom Brady wasn't the greatest quarterback in the league at that time. Wasn't even like a Pro Bowl caliber player, but that defense was so dominant that they were in there every year, and Tom Brady was making those clutch passes. He was getting those conversions when they needed him, coming through in the clutch time after time after time, and that's how they were successful during that era. And then they went that 10-year run. You know, some Randy Moss in there, some Wes Welker in there in between, setting records, going 16-0, but falling short of those championships. When we're talking dynasty, we're not talking about years that you came up short. We're not talking about years where you won the AFC or NFC. No. We're talking about overall championship greatness, overall runs of success, and then when they got back to the big game in the 2010s, winning the 3 more championships in 5 years, it was because of Tom Brady and that offense and those all-time weapons and Rob Gronkowski, Julian Edelman, 2 of the greatest playoff performers that we've ever seen, arguably the greatest tight end ever, probably most people would say the greatest quarterback ever, at least right now, and just being led by in 2 different ways. It's just a testament to Bill Belichick's overall greatness as a coach too, doing it on the defensive end, doing it on the offensive end, and helping lead this franchise into a place where they had never been before. 0 championships before Bill Belichick, 6 after he got there.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rob. The New England Patriots were one of the worst franchises in all of pro sports. And then once you see a quarterback and a head coach tandem combined for 6 rings, right. I mean, it has to be one of the greatest dynasties of all time.
Absolutely. So the only dynasty that we can put over the New England Patriots in the history of sports, it's the Chicago Bulls, man. We're talking about the 90s Bulls with Michael Jordan, the greatest player in basketball, leading the way with Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, Horace Grant, all these quality players But let's not make no mistake about it, okay? We're talking about number 23, his airness, the all-time great Michael Jordan. He is why this dynasty is on this list, and he is why this team won 6 championships, 2 different back-to-backs, didn't even get back to the NBA Finals or Conference Finals during that 2-year split where he wasn't there. But when he was there, they were the best team in the league, way more dominant than any other team in the league, and it's why they're, number 1 on this list.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would probably argue that they could have won 8 rings in a row if Jordan never retired and never went to the MLB and this, that, and the third. I mean, this team won 2 three-peats every single year between that 8-year span. So
right.
3-peat, 2 years off, 3-peat after that. I mean, we're talking about Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan, Dennis Rodman, Pippen, Horace Grant. I mean, a whole list of people. Steve Kerr. So they had really good players. They had a really great team. John Paxson. But nah, this is one of the greatest franchises, one of the greatest runs of all time, and it just makes you wonder if they never had that 2-year gap, they could easily be the greatest franchise with the greatest dynasty of all time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that we got to point out again is the fact that this Bulls team that won 6 in 8 years, they were doing it with pretty much a full league. We're talking 30 NBA teams, a full-on NBA playoffs. The only difference was the first round was 5 games instead of 7 games. So that's a lot different than when we're talking, all these Celtics fans who are probably going to go in the comments and be like, oh, the Celtics have more championships. Well, yeah, they only had 8 teams to face, and there was only 1 playoff round before the finals. So it's a lot different path, a lot more adversity that they had to go through, but they had the leader, they had the coach to get through it, and that's why they're at the top of the list.
Yeah, and it's just so dope to see all that stuff documented and see all the things that they went through and how they fought together and found a way to win all those ships throughout, a lot of tumultuous times.
Yeah, the last dance was made because of the dynasty. So it's a great thing to watch. Great thing to see how amazing that they were at the time, and they're still at the top of this list. The greatest dynasties in sports history, from football to basketball to baseball. We got them all. These are the 5 greatest in the history of sports.
And we're still pretty early into the 2020s, so we could see a dynasty erupt towards the end of the 2020s, and it could wind up being one of the greatest dynasties of all time.
Could be seeing it unfold right now with the Kansas City Chiefs. So we'll see how it unfolds over these next few years, but what a list, what a great ranking. It's been a pleasure.
Been a pleasure. Smash that like button, double tap that subscribe. We'll catch y'all next week with some fire-ass content. Get it, Rob. Peace.